Coming up on American Black Journal, our Roundtable is back to take on the stories that matter to the African American community here in Southeast Michigan. We're going to talk about the sentence for former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin in the murder of George Floyd. Plus, we'll examine the cause of the disastrous flooding that has affected so many Detroiters. You don't want to miss this show or the conversation. American Black Journal starts now.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support also provided by the Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The DTE Foundation proudly supports 50 years of American Black Journal in covering African American history, culture, and politics. The DTE Foundation and American Black Journal partners in presenting African American perspectives about our communities and in our world.
Also brought to you by AAA, Nissan Foundation, Ally, Impact at Home, UAW Solidarity Forever, and viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson, your host, and as always, I'm glad you've joined us. I'm coming to you today from the little radio studio I have built in my home to tape Detroit Today, which I do each day for WDET. Today it is doubling as television studio space. We're halfway through 2021, and it's been quite a year so far. It's a good time to bring back our roundtable to examine some of the latest news headlines. First up, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison for murdering George Floyd. Is that an appropriate punishment? Is it enough? Is it too much? And will it change the relationship between African Americans and police, not just in Minneapolis, but around the country? We're going to talk about that sentence and the calls for police reform. And then if you live in Detroit, you probably were affected by these amazingly heavy rains last week that flooded basements, freeways, and streets all over the community. We're going to examine the issues that led to the devastation and left so many people of color really vulnerable. So let's get right to it. Here's my conversation with roundtable guests Karen Dumas, Brandon Bryce, Greg Bowens, and Carrie Leon Jackson. All right, so we got a lot to talk about, and we have some late breaking news that I absolutely want to add into the conversation here. But let's start with the sentencing of Derek Chauvin, which we have waited a long time to see how that would all wrap up, how it would all end. 22 and a half years in prison was the sentence. He won't serve all of that probably because of good time and parole, but a long time in prison. The question is this enough? Is this justice for what he did to George Floyd? I'm going to mix it up and start with Carrie Leon Jackson this time.
Even though the range was a minimum of 10 years and a maximum of 40. I think that a judge adding 10 years on top of the 10 years, pretty much because of the depraved nature of what he did, it's a good sentence. I mean, the truth of the matter is, even in Wayne County, the prosecutor's office generally, if somebody's charged with first-degree murder, they usually give them a 20 to 40-year sentence for a guilty plea. 22 years is a pretty fair sentence. Family members are never, anybody who watched the video, of course, we want him to go away forever and to die. But the truth of the matter is, 22 and a year sentence is a pretty significant, and it's also the most any police officer has ever received for deciding to kill a black person, an unarmed black man. So it's a significant sentence. And even though he might be eligible for parole in about 15 years, parole board's probably not going to let him out. But here's the other thing. He's never going to be in general population. They're going to probably relocate him somewhere to a federal facility. He's going to wind up staying where nobody can beat him. Because the thing is, prisoners would be, killing somebody like him in prison would make somebody else golden. So they're going to have to go out of their way to keep him. 15 years of being confined and not, that's pretty hard time. He's going to have to pay a price.
Oh, Karen Dumas, what do you think?
Well, not speaking from a legal perspective, but I'm looking at it from a messaging perspective. Does it send a message that George Floyd's life mattered, that police officers that break the law are not beyond reproach, and that is this going to be the conduit for changing what is necessary so that good cops are supported and elevated and bad cops are penalized and somehow taken off of the force? And to me, that's yet to be seen. Carrie spoke to the fairness of the sentence that was imposed, but what happens to the conversation socially hereafter? Do we stop? I think there are 2 statutes for George Floyd. Is this looked upon as the end of this discussion and of this process? And to that, I say no. If it is, then we have not come any farther than we were prior. If it is, the start of what should be a continued discussion and change in process, then yes.
Brandon, is this enough? And does this send us further down the road of this conversation about how policing ought to change?
Well, 20 years, I think, is sufficient. I'm always asking the question, what did we learn and how is this going to change or make an impact? And so I think, when we look at, going down the road, what did we learn? We learned that there's a challenge and we need more community policing. We need more officers who don't know the area to take the time to invest in the communities that they patrol. What else are we learning from this? We're learning that, let's be honest of where we are. We've got an equity issue around just fairness. The fact that are there real opportunities that engage to get more Blacks in law enforcement and on the police force? And so I think this is not only a teachable moment, but it's really a way of reflection on do we have the representation when it comes to law enforcement agencies that we need to? And if not, how do we get there?
Greg, what do you think?
Well, I think that, to be honest with you, I don't think that this is really going to have an impact on much right now. I can go back to buzzards and nevers here in Detroit being convicted for killing of Malice Green, and that was without any video, without any videotapes. And then, what we've seen all this time, I've seen just on videos, Black men getting shot in the back by the cops, running across a field, just ridiculous stuff. And so nothing has changed. Well, let me put it this way. I shouldn't say nothing has changed. We've become a lot more aware. Some of the laws have tightened, but in terms of addressing the systemic racism that exists and that proliferates throughout our law enforcement community, we haven't seen a lot of change, and we haven't seen it change since buzzards and never. So I'm not optimistic that we will see real reform out of this. I am looking forward to the federal prosecutions now of Chauvin and the other cops that were involved as it relates to a violation of Mr. Floyd's civil rights. That's coming up next. And so he'll get even more time added on to what he's going to serve now. The interesting thing is the way that this has been covered is that I didn't see the same kind of reaction. You remember when my man O.J. Simpson, I say my man, I don't know him, but that verdict came down and how one side was cheering and another side was sad. It seemed like on this one, everybody was more middle of the road, more expected that he would get a sentence. And so, we'll see what happens, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not convinced that we're going to see real reform as a result of this.
So we want to change subjects here and get to what we're experiencing right now here in Southeast Michigan, which is the cleanup from yet another major storm that not only dumped rain, but caused floods, wind damage, power outages. Seems like these things happen every couple of years. We don't seem to be adapting to the fact that they are going to happen a couple of years and being able to fix the infrastructure to be able to withstand this kind of thing. But the thing that I've noticed over the last couple of days really is the disproportionate impact of these kind of storms and their aftermath on people of color. The devastation in Detroit looks different than it does in many other places. I know Grosse Pointe is an exception to that. And Greg, I'm going to start with you because you live in Grosse Pointe and are dealing with what happened there. A pumping station failed and water backed up into just, it looks like everybody's basement in Grosse Pointe and everyone's backyard. I've seen pictures of people's backyards that look like Lake St. Clair. Tell us how you're doing, Greg, bailing out, and tell us what you think about what we're prepared to do to manage all this.
Yeah, that's a good question and a good point. Nature is no respecter of geographical lines. Doesn't care, where you think you want to draw your city maps, and water goes where it's gonna go. And so, just 2 blocks over, with my friends like Steve Hood who live on the canal over there, they got hit again too. The front of my house looked like a river. The front of the houses on Scripps looked like a river as well, going up to their doorstep almost. And so this is a lesson that we keep learning over and over again as it relates to not investing in our infrastructure and not doing the kinds of things that would allow for the runoff to dissipate in ways that it doesn't back up into, Karen's basement and and everybody else's basement. And so the simple things, I don't know. I mean, part of it is that the whole water sewage infrastructure is an industry. It's an industry. And while cities, while they're not supposed to be designed to make money off of them, the water and sewage departments in every city is an enterprise agency. Mm-hmm. And I think, Steve, it goes back to one of the questions that you've been asking for like 10 years as it relates to what is the cost of life? How much are we going to put a value on the things that we need, whether it was the poisoning in Flint or something as simple as, traffic control and stuff like that. And so this situation that we're in now, where I can look up and down my street and every single house on my block has got, damage going all the way up from Jefferson all the way up to the river. Now, on the other side of Jefferson, not so much, but if you continue down my street to 7 Mile and you hit like 7 Mile and Lake Point, boom, same thing, that area is just devastated. And I think this really does speak to a need for us to rethink the way that we do stuff. For example, we have concrete driveways, and the water runs off on the driveways, it contributes more. What's wrong with having stone driveways with pebbles and stuff like that to soak up the water? You can do that with parking lots. There are some easy fixes to eliminating some of this water. And Stephen, everybody knows that the east side of Detroit going east is a big giant floodplain. And so there ought to be things done, I think, to mitigate this. And it's not just about digging and laying more pipes. It's about things that we can do right now.
So Karen, I know you have rich family history along the riverfront here in Detroit. That area was devastated, of course, by this. Not the first time. A few summers back, we had similar kinds of problems there, and we still, again, we're not doing anything but managing the crisis. Nothing seems to change in terms of the way that we live or the way we prepare for these kind of things. But give us a sense of what it's like in your sort of home spots here in Detroit.
Well, as you say, I grew up on the canal. We were used to preparing for floods. The city used to deliver sandbags, to help prepare for it. But here we are, 30 years later, and we're still dealing with, as Greg indicated, the same things. In spite of increased technology, in spite of increased or higher taxes, in spite of repeated promises to help improve the quality of life for Detroiters. So I think it speaks to a lack of accountability. I think it speaks to, the proverbial can kicking that we have become known for here in this city. We're always in this proverbial state of coming up or coming out or emerging from something that we never do. And, it does impact and impose upon people who do not have the resources. We had water coming in our garage and in our basement through the conduit. We took the pump from our pond to pump out the water in the basement. So there was minimal damage. But what about people that don't have access or immediate resources? Their basements are flooded, their memories are gone, their houses are compromised. Our concern is, what impact did it do, for drywall, for, a redesigned basement that we just completed. So those are other things. It becomes increasingly more expensive to live in this city every day. It really, really does. And the cost and the quality of life don't equate.
Yeah. Carrie, what do you think about this?
So you started out on one point in terms of how Black community has been impacted, the Detroiters have been impacted. And traditionally, as we've quickly found out during COVID, the Black community always is the one that's impacted, whether it's for the hurricanes over in Florida and in South Carolina, whether it's, whatever happens in Texas during the weather, it's always the Black community is the one that's in a position to wind up being punished by it. I wish that there was a quick fix to that. First thing we've got to do is to get beyond systemic racism, and then we can deal with it. But everything that Greg just listed, everything that Karen just listed requires leadership. Requires folks to not kick the can down the road, or to stand in front of a camera and say, oh, it's climate change, as if they didn't know it's going to rain or it's going to snow or that fires are going to occur. Stop pretending that we're going to blame everybody else. And I'm telling you, everybody that held the press conference in the last 2 days, I didn't hear one leader say, we failed you, we're sorry. It took Karen to tweet out a suggestion for the Duggan administration to go back and decide, oh, maybe we better look out for the citizens and not punish them for putting stuff on the curb. Please, the city needs leadership. The state needs better leadership other than what we currently have.
And there were two candidates, Stephen, on the east side. One candidate was going and helping residents remove debris, and another candidate arranged for a special pickup. Those are things that the city should be able to flip a switch and pick this stuff up, not give a ticket, and allow people to put housing debris on the curb, because there have been structural compromises as a result.
Yeah. Brandon, what's your thought about what we ought to be doing?
Well, the first thing we ought to be doing is taking environmental justice a lot more serious than we have, specifically around Black and brown communities. One of the travesties is, we don't realize that there are so many issues that happen when you talk about economic injustices, which can lead to or become, in some cases, public health issues. It can become a financial crisis if you don't have the means to take care of it. And I think this is where the city has really got to start to look at, Carrie mentioned systematic racism, but what does that mean in 2021? We're not talking about the picketed fences anymore. Now we're talking about the lack of resources to take care of a flood if you don't have the resource, if the city refuses to do it. Or we're talking about things like what happens when you're out of technology or you get a fuse burst because of the environment. And so I think this whole concept of, we talked about systematic racism, we talked about economic injustice and racial justice, but the environmental justice, I think, is something that has much more greater travesties, especially for those communities that don't have the means to take care of it or to deal with it.
Yeah. Okay, so I was going to just have those be the two topics, Derek Chauvin and flooding, that we talked about, but the day we taped this, there was big news in the city of Detroit. The mayor of the city of Detroit, Mike Duggan, announced that he intends to marry the woman that he had been having an affair with and broke up his marriage, and somebody who has a pretty big city contract as well. Of course, sex and marriage and relationships always make for spicy stories when they are in politics. This one seems to me to rank right up there with them. It is a fascinating turn in the mayor's personal story, but also a new chapter, I guess, in the story of the city of Detroit. Karen, you served 2 mayors here in the city. You never had to plan a wedding, though. So
No, that wasn't part of it. And on a personal level, I think I speak for everybody. We certainly wish the mayor happiness. I mean, life tends to take different turns left and right, and sometimes you find happiness where you find it and not where people tell you you're supposed to. So we wish him well. But on the other side, it's very interesting that side chicks are on the come up these days. And this is a woman that certainly well respected in her professional right, but she was the mayor's mistress. She is the beneficiary of contractual subjectivity here in the city of Detroit. And again, as we said before, it's always the same thing. It's over and over and nothing ever changes. The interesting thing is, and I appreciate you acknowledging the whole backstory of this, Stephen, is that people were going to paint this picture that, now we've got this nice love story and, we're going to have a couple back in the Manoogian mansion. Like, we forget and we want to try to erase things that to me are relevant when we're telling stories. So we got to look at the whole picture.
Greg, also,
Yeah.
the mayors here in Detroit, you didn't have to plan a wedding either. What would you do for Mike?
Well, I mean, look, Detroit is the blackest city in the country, and Mike Duggan is marrying a brown woman, and so you're going to have your first interracial couple in the mayor's office. Now, what?
Allegedly, Gregory, allegedly.
I don't know why you say it allegedly, but assuming that he gets reelected, and they have the wedding and this goes through, you will have a very sort of different picture. What would that represent for the city of Detroit in terms of, us being the city being the blackest city in the country and having an interracial couple? And how will that play out the next time that Mayor Duggan goes to Mackinac and he starts preaching about how like racism and redlining impacted Detroit? Will he have more credibility now because he is in a interracial relationship? I don't know, but it's interesting. Go ahead.
What are you shaking your head about, Carrie?
No, that's
not going to get more credibility.
You said Carrie, I'm sorry.
Oh. So we're just going to ignore the fact that he lied about it. He punished people that asked the questions about it, that the media refused to cover the way that they covered Kwame, that they refused to cover the hush-hush divorce. Are we just going to sweep all that under the carpet now that he's taking a picture with her and saying, I'm going to marry the side chick, which, in terms of Karen saying side chicks come up, married men very rarely leave their wife to marry the side chick. And in this case, he's marrying the side chick. So, we got to get more credibility. She will forever be Monica Lewinsky. She will always be the side chick.
That's what I'm a guy and I take exception to. We're hitting the side chick thing just a little too hard. This is a respected professional, who's part of a leadership team in a university.
I mean, said that, but she was still.
I know you did. You did.
Mean, as a woman, I don't mean that offensively. I don't mean it negatively. I don't mean it disrespectfully. I mean it honestly. If you are seeing a married man, you are a side chick. I don't care whether you have a PhD or whether you're throwing sliders at White Castle. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And what you do and who you are doesn't change that.
Well, I think on some level, us referring to her in this kind of way, would we be doing the same thing if she was white? I mean,
yes.
Is she getting treated a little more harshly, and will she get treated a little more harshly because she's not white? Mm-hmm. And at the same token, Carrie just brought up that that there's a discrepancy in the way that the media is covering Mayor Duggan in relationship to this issue, and you're insinuating it's probably true because he is white, right? You're saying he gets a pass.
Yeah, Brandon, I want to get you in here. Are you going to go to this wedding, Brandon?
I probably won't be invited. I was never really a fan of the mayor anyway, but there's a couple major issues here. I mean, let's forget whatever ethnic group she is. That's not important here. The real issue here is the challenge of how the media has really given kudos to one mayor and refused to address the issues of another. One of the things is, some have said that this is an example of when the media picks and chooses who they create, who are the enemy and who is the victor. And I think this is a bigger problem to say, this is regardless of the situation, regardless of the love here, there is some corruption that has occurred here. And so now the question is, when you want to talk about this whole concept of systematic racism, it's getting into the fact that, is the media deciding and picking and choosing when, they hold Black leadership to one account, but they don't hold the counter to the other. There's a much bigger issue here, aside from just this whole wedding issue. And then the other thing is the media, once again, has a responsibility to tell the entire story or not report it. I cannot say that has been done here. Matter of fact, it's almost, when you want to use the term, whitewash, well, that appears to be the situation here. And so stay tuned, we'll see. But I think, when we talk about just the role of Black leadership, and the fact is, are we being fair with one administration over the next?
It's always great to have you guys here. Thanks so much for joining us on American Black Journal.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for us today. Thanks for watching. You can find out more about our guests at AmericanBlackJournal.org. And as always, you can connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter. We'll see you next time.
From Delta faucets to Behr paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support also provided by the Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The DTE Foundation proudly supports 50 years of American Black Journal in covering African American history, culture, and politics. The DTE Foundation and American Black Journal partners in presenting African American perspectives about our communities and in our world.
Also brought to you by AAA, Nissan Foundation, Ally, Impact at Home, UAW Solidarity Forever, and viewers like you. Thank you.